So on Wednesday mornings, we go into the week and we get to consider wisdom, which is Scripture incarnate, how it's lived out in our lives, how God transforms us and grows us in community with one another. So this morning, we're going to have the opportunity to take a look at what it looks like to live together in the body of Christ. As men and women of God, we have the opportunity to learn how to value, encourage, and empower one another towards God's kingdom purposes. This is Women's History Month, and so today we're going to take a look at what Scripture has to say and consider what we might see that we hadn't seen before. We might consider how God sees us, how God calls us to be in community with one another, and how we might respond to one another in the body of Christ. So this morning, as you're hearing from 3 different speakers, I'd like you to ask the question, what's one thing that God might be asking me to see that I hadn't seen before? How might God open my heart to grow me to live life with others in a new way? So this morning, it's my privilege to introduce all 3 of our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Professor Jeannine Hanger. She is an adjunct professor here at Biola and Talbot School of Theology, and she's also in the midst of her doctoral program at the University of Aberdeen, studying the Gospel of John. And I'm so glad you're doing that because we need your voice. So thank you for the work that you're doing there. In her life outside of teaching and academia, she lives in Torrance. She is married to her husband, Garrick, for the past 19 years, and they have 3 children, Bella, Emery, and Garrison. They worship at Rolling Hills Covenant Church, where her husband is a pastor. This morning, we also have the opportunity to hear from Chad Miller. He is our Director of Student-Led Ministries and Spiritual Formation. You may know him from leading our midday prayer services and our 5 services, and then also working with our student-led ministries in different capacities, doing training and trying to empower our students to go out beyond the walls of Biola. And one of the things I really appreciate about Chad is he actually always challenges me to see something that I didn't see. It's the way that he has been able to take ministry and life, which he has led in the church for many years, and then blend that with our theology and how God grows us. And so Chad is someone, when we just sit down and have conversations, I always see a glimpse of something that I hadn't seen before. So you're going to want to hear what God has to say through him. This morning, we also have Rachael Kam. I'm so excited about her. She grew up and was born in Hong Kong. She moved to California at the age of 8 and lived in a predominantly immigrant first-generation and second-generation Chinese community. She majors in communication sciences and studies and disorders, and she currently serves in SMU, and she has also served as our Tarot Talk intern for the Seed Affinity groups. One of the things I just really appreciate about Rachael is that she really cares about how God is helping us to do community and life together, but also investing in leaders to really help equip the next group of students. So right now, she's in the middle of thinking about how do we train up the next ministry team for Tarot Talk for next year. So she is moving forward into that and also going to be serving as one of the coordinators for Seed. So I'm so grateful that we get to have all 3 of our Biola community members just share with us this morning. So would you join me in welcoming Professor Hanger?
So this is my first time speaking at a Biola chapel, and so I wanted to make a good impression on you all. And so when I asked the Lord about a prominent Bible woman to speak about, I was thinking he'd give me someone like Mary or Deborah, but you might guess that's not who he gave me. Instead, it was someone I didn't expect and I really didn't want at first, if I'm being honest. She doesn't even have a name in her story, but I think that might be the reason to highlight her this morning. So here goes. We're going to jump right into the text. Her story shows up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I'm going to be reading from Luke 8. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, I'm aware it is super cliche to, at a chapel meant to honor women, be speaking about the woman subject to bleeding. but I think she has something for us all, female and male. So let's start with her illness. Some scholars will gloss over the problem. She is the woman with the hemorrhage. She was subject to bleeding. Some might be a little bit more bold and they'll say, oh, it was uterine bleeding. Today we might say she has a bleeding issue. That's what we like to call things that we don't want to talk about publicly. We say we have an issue, right? I'll confess an issue of mine. When I was your age, I used to have bunions on my feet. You know what bunions are? They're what your 83-year-old great-grandma is supposed to get. So when I was 26 years old, I had them surgically removed, and when I was on crutches and people asked me what happened, I said, oh, it's because of my foot structure issues, not bunions. And I had told my husband to tell people foot structure issues, right? Because it just sounds nicer, right? So let's be real about this woman's issue. It probably had to do with her period, right? We make it sound nice. We call it that time of the month. But let's elevate it. This is a rite of passage for girls, a God-given function that makes it possible for women made in God's image to bring image bearers into the world. And here's the woman's problem. The very thing that should be cause for celebration has been a source of pain, because one day she got her period, and for whatever reason, it never stopped for 12 years. 12 years, you guys. I have a 12-year-old daughter. Jairus in the story, his daughter was 12 years old. For the entire length of a little girl's life, she had this problem. And I don't think we appreciate how debilitating and isolating her condition was. Today, we can take a pill, have a procedure, keep it quiet, and no one has to know. But for a Jewish woman, her period deemed her ritually unclean through the week. This put her into seclusion because everything she touched would become unclean. People, objects, everything. So this had to impact her socially. Who's she hanging out with? It impacted her vocationally. In the ancient world, so much value was placed on women bearing children. Consider what this does for her prospects. She couldn't change her major and fix it, right? I wonder if her condition caused her to feel like the world was passing her by. And I wonder if you've ever experienced this, the feeling that the world is passing you by while you're in a season of waiting. This impacted her financially. Another gospel writer says she spent all of her money on doctors. And finally, I think this impacted her spiritually. For one, she could not participate with her community in the normal rhythms of worship. For 12 years, she has to stay home. How might this have shaped her interactions with the Lord, knowing that she was excluded from religious life because she was considered unclean? And after 12 constant years of being ritually unclean, don't you think this message might have infiltrated her sense of identity? I think her story intersects with ours by so many analogies, both men and women. Have you ever been so debilitated by an issue that you were left feeling passed over, left out, and completely spent? Whether it be a physical or a mental illness, or a struggle with a particular sin, or a persistent addiction, or a sense of shame. Something so persistent that it has come to identify how you think of yourself as continuously unclean or untouchable or unworthy. Have you ever felt excluded, living your life on the outskirts? This is where the story gets good, because this woman has heard about Jesus, that he's a healer, and she's hoping that he's going to help her too. So she makes a plan. Mark tells us that she talked to herself about her plan, which I think is a clue into her strength, because we often find courage in numbers. But this woman did not have 4 friends to lower her down through the roof, and she did not have a prominent dad like Jairus to advocate for her. So it says she said to herself, if I just touch his cloak, I will get well. So as Jesus is passing by, she squeezes her way over to him amidst the mob, touches his cloak, and immediately feels it. Jesus, the Messiah, with authority over sickness and death, heals her. Some have criticized her plan because she came to him in secret, as if to steal some of his power for herself. But I think she was brave, because think of the risk she took as an unclean woman in public. What if someone saw her and called her out for contaminating others with her touch? If she carries unclean and unworthy as her identity, think of the courage it took to approach Jesus at all. And I wonder if her physical posture mimics our heart posture at times. Jesus is on his way to important things. Who am I to ask for any more than a touch of his robe? I'm not worthy. Jairus, the prominent leader, goes right up to Jesus and he asks for his daughter's healing. So I guess by contrast, you could call her timid. But given her situation, I call it courageous. She had this scrappy kind of faith, one that says, though I'm totally bankrupt and desperate, I believe, and I'm going to do what it takes to get to Jesus. And he heals her. But don't miss what Jesus does next. He stops the entire procession for her, and he invites her to speak. He gives her center stage. One scholar I read laments that this would have been a real test of faith for Jairus. His daughter's life hung in the balance while Jesus stopped for this woman with a non-emergency condition. Perhaps. But I love Jesus because he sees this woman's desperate situation for the emergency that it was to her. And he stops for her. And then Luke says it like this: she came trembling and fell down before him and declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. Jesus gives this woman a voice in front of her community, taking her dignity from here to here. She got to testify about her desperate situation, about her faith in Jesus, and about his healing. And Jesus responds by calling her daughter and commending her faith. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Recently, I was sitting in a season of my life where I was feeling on the outside of some things. I was feeling unseen and not valued, and I felt as if the world was passing me by due to lack of opportunity. And in my desperation that day, I reached out to touch Jesus' robe. And in that moment, he stopped me, and he gave me this picture of the Mary and Martha story. You know, the one where Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. And Mary's position at Jesus' feet ascribes great worth to women in that day because this positions her as a disciple. And in that moment when I was crying out to the Lord, suddenly the picture I was given was that I was the one sitting in Mary's place at Jesus' feet, and Jesus was saying to me, I see you, daughter. I've got you, disciple of mine. And in that moment, Jesus' presence healed my sense of exclusion. And so as I wrestled with the Lord over talking about this woman and not someone else who I considered more prominent, it occurred to me that we honor women as we recognize how Jesus deems them prominent. When this unnamed, unclean woman reached out to touch him, she did not contaminate him, but this touch brought healing. Jesus healed her. He gave her back her voice. He restored her dignity. And he saved her in every way, calling her daughter and sending her off in peace. So for us this morning, in the places where we don't feel like a son or a daughter, when we are sick or on the margins, when we are stuck in our issues, when we are desperate, can we have the same kind of courage and faith to come to Jesus? Because he stops for us too. Male and female, Jesus heals, he gives us a voice, he restores our dignity, he saves us in every way, and he calls us sons and daughters, and he breathes peace over us.
There is a secret about waves. When you're learning to navigate them, it gets a little tricky, but you can still learn the secret too. You see, no matter how big and how scary the wave is, all you have to do is sneak underneath the wave to be safe. What a crazy revelation for a 4-year-old to discover. But it's real. I was out there when I was 4. And the only appropriate way for me to be out there in the waves, navigating, ducking, holding my breath until my lungs bled, was if I was out there with a trained, powerful, authoritative force of nature. I needed to learn to navigate these troubled waters, and in order to do so, I'd have to pass through many layers of what can only be called initiation. I would have to learn to admit my fears about the waves rolling toward me. I'd need to trust the wisdom and authority of someone who was telling me that I was not going to die, even though that's what my natural inclinations were telling me. And mostly, I would need to value someone else's opinion of me enough to want them to be proud of me. Luckily, I clung to that authoritative force of nature who seemed miraculously immovable against the currents that were coming in and going out. I called that authoritative force of nature my mom. This cycle of bestowing identity, strength, courage, and growth happened time and time again with my mother as I grew. It's not that I grew up without a dad. I'm grateful that my parents have stayed married all these years. It's just that in this story, and in many stories other like this, my dad was up in the sand sitting in a chair under an umbrella. You see, my dad had grown up in Joplin, Missouri, and there's no beaches there. My mom had grown up in Manhattan Beach, California. And my grandparents still lived there when I was this little, and so a day at the beach was a day at home for my mom. And it was in those early years my mom helped me to develop the capacity for adventure, courage, bravery, traits that stereotypically are bestowed from fathers to sons. Well, for me, it was my mom. And in these transitional years, when as a child I didn't yet have my own bravery, I literally had to borrow the bravery of my mother until I could find and develop my own. I was being initiated by this woman. To understand me, to really understand Chad, you'd have to do a character sketch of the women who have helped me find my footing as an adult. If you know the Enneagram, I'm an 8, which means that I can typically be hard-headed, hard-charging, overbearing. You're not going to control me, typical male. But ironically, mine is not a story of being influenced by powerful men, but by being shaped by influential women. It makes sense that I found a life partner then in Beth. Beth was one of those super annoying people who knew what her path in life would be when she was 15 years old. I'm 40 and still trying to find my way. This was the age that she decided she wanted to be a speech therapist, and once she decided what her goal was, she slowly and methodically, like a river that knows its way, executed the steps to get into the requisite undergrad program and then again into the appropriate grad program. And this is where we met, in her second year of grad school, when she was almost to the finish line of her decade-long marathon. Me, I was still floundering, trying to impress this incredible force of nature. I had just graduated from Biola, and I was bringing in the big bucks as a worship leader at a local church. And just a quick note, nobody making significantly more than minimum wage actually calls that the big bucks, so I can assure you I wasn't making very much money. And this really isn't about money, but about the ability to make those crucial next steps into adulthood after college. So the contrast between me and Beth, you have to understand, was huge at this point. Beth was about to become a speech therapist, and that's a great job, by the way. And here I was, stuck in entry-level purgatory. I knew I wanted to get engaged, and I knew that I'd have to step my game up if I was going to land someone of this caliber. And so I quit the church gig, and I settled into working at a respectable desk job that I hated. But I felt way more responsible, way more initiated, way more adult, having been spurred on by my force of nature potential life partner, Beth. And like I said, I did hate that job, but I did it. And to this day, I am still so proud, over and above other jobs that I've held, that I did that job. Because Beth was challenging me to grow, a force of nature, like my mom. Somewhere in there, I decided to quit that job and enroll in Talbot. And the choice to be in seminary for the first 3 years of our marriage guaranteed that Beth would be supporting me for a very, very long time, a role that she continues to hold to this day. On the new album, Bono, that's you too, Bono sings a song called Landlady. It's a song to his beloved wife, Allie, who supported Bono and the band in the early years when there was really no money to show for all their hard work. And to this day, Bono calls Allie his landlady. You better believe that this song is on my playlist I use when I want to remember how grateful and in love I am with Beth. It makes, in many ways, my job feels like it's the big one. As the two of us as a couple talk about what are we going to sacrifice in order to execute our work, my job actually wins out all the time. Oh, honey, I got to go to work. Mine feels like the big one. But make no mistake, I work and get to explore my vocation under my wife's covering. Just this last January, Beth's gifts of leadership and wisdom and discernment were recognized by our church as she was nominated and then elected by our church congregation to serve in our church's most influential leadership team, the church board. I'm so grateful that we worship at a place where the opportunity to explore and express her gifting becomes available to her based on her gifting rather than on her gender. Because I am not kidding, she is an incredible gifted leader and board member. And so it has been for me here at Biola. My life has been changed by working for Lisa Egram. There isn't a big decision I could imagine myself making at work without first seeking her wisdom and second seeking her blessing. It has been a joy to work with Lisa Ishihara, who tactically knows how to navigate complexity like few people I've ever seen. Noreen Muehlhoff in the back, I know for a fact that you have helped your boys become men like my mom helped me become one. Being shaped by women in key leadership positions has not been the exception in my time at Biola. It has been the norm. I worked with the likes of Dan Decker, who was my RD when I was an RA in Emerson. I have leadership and execution envy from every one of my female coworkers in student development. I worked on the University Committee for Women with the likes of Dorothy Calley, Carrie Stockton, Susan Conashiro, Heather Pfaff, Brenda Velasco, Dr. Rebecca Hong, Dr. Carolyn Kim, Alana Godoy, and Dr. Joy Qualls, just to name a few. I partner with Seed in the incredibly lasting kingdom work of Tamara Malone, Alicia Andre, and Melika Consultado. Where would I be and where would Biola be without the influence and leadership of these important people in my life? And I would just say this in closing. My fear is that for some of us men, we have potentially come to believe that women have wisdom for women, when really what women have is wisdom for people. I cannot imagine who I would be without the wisdom, authority, and initiation of women who have taken the time to invest in me and to draw me out, to see things in me that I didn't see in myself. My prayer for our school, but also for the broader culture, is that we would learn to recognize in the voices of the women around us that they have wisdom for all of us, and that in terms of leadership, their voice should not be relegated to the category of second-tier importance. For all of us, as we listen, as we walk through our day, I would ask that we would then recall the names and faces, the situations where women have spoken deeply into your life, have challenged you to grow, and have spoken wisdom and discernment into your bones. Take a moment to be grateful, and then take a moment to publicly thank them from the podium at a Biola University chapel. And if that's not possible, then take a moment maybe to write it out as a note, or to see them in person and to tell them. Because what I've come to learn is that men receive a lot of encouragement, gratitude, and general reinforcement for their expressions of leadership. So to support and encourage these women who have shaped you, take a moment to explicitly spell that out for them. Don't let another day go by without them knowing exactly how you feel about the investment they made in your life. So to my mom, Helen, who is struggling mightily with her health these days, but never gives up. Thank you for pushing me. Thank you for still inspiring me. To my wife, Beth, to Lisa Egram, and to the other coworkers, thank you for providing the cover I've needed to grow into better versions of myself. I'm so grateful. I literally couldn't have done it on my own.
As I reflect on a woman in the Bible that has impacted me in being made in God's image, I think of Esther. Esther is an interesting person because I think the typical descriptions of her, I think of her bravery, I think of her strength, I think of her beauty, and I think of how she is the heroine of her story in the book of Esther. But I think we forget that she starts out as an orphan girl. She is without a father, without a mother, and she is taken in by her uncle Mordecai. And because of this, she is given a position. She works her way up and wins the king's favor and becomes queen. And that's really significant, an orphan girl in that position. And though God is not mentioned at all in the book, I think it's so clear and so evident that God is in and through the entire book of Esther. And so I think when I think of Esther, I think of how when she discovers that she is in the position to save her nation, the Jewish people, she has a choice to make. She can either choose to act or she can choose to not. And I think this is really significant because I think we all have decisions, and I think we all are in positions of certain powers and certain authorities where we can either allow God to use us or allow God to not use us. And so I think with Esther, what baffles me is that she was hesitant. She didn't want to appeal to the king, and she didn't really know how to save her people. And it takes Mordecai's encouragement to really just get at that. And so Mordecai, what's interesting is he says to Esther If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will come to the Jewish people from another place. And he goes on, he says, but who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. And so this is interesting because even if Esther were to stay silent, even if she were to not speak up for her people, deliverance and relief will come from another place. And so I think that's a reminder that I think, when we're in positions of leadership or positions in our families or whatnot, we can keep silent, and that is always an option. But God gives us the privilege to be part of his plan and his work. And so Esther's next step is to say to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews and hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. And this is significant because she then draws her community in. She invites them to be part of her work with her in fasting and in praying for her before she enters into the king's presence to ask for his help. And so as Esther's heart wept and cried for justice, she was able to allow God to use her. And so as we look at Esther, I want to encourage everyone in this room, whether you're a male or a female, I think this goes for anyone. Remember that God orchestrated every moment before this, every little moment before this. And he continues to orchestrate every moment after this. Our refusal to take part in God's work doesn't thwart God. If we refuse and we choose to stay silent, that doesn't thwart God, and that doesn't ruin his plans and his purpose, and it doesn't stop him from fulfilling his promises. But I think it's important to recognize that it's a privilege to take part in what he is doing. And I think we have the gifts and talents to take part in God's work because he's created us in his image, and he's allowed us to take part in that work. And so like Esther, I would encourage you to remember that you are operating in a kingdom that has already been won for you. God cares about his people. He cares about relationships, and he cares for his children to be brought back to him. And I think more than that, what we can gain from Esther is the way she did that. She did that by honoring the king. She didn't just go up to the king and demand something from him. She knew how to honor him, and that was to prepare a banquet, and that was to honor him. And I think when we think of ways in which we need to speak up for justice or for truth, I think we can think of many situations in your lives, and they may seem like we are calling someone out, being disrespectful or whatnot, but I think if we can live in such a way that honors one another in being able to see that they are also made in God's image, and to honor them with not just our thoughts, actions, but also in the way we talk about them behind their backs, I think that holds more significance. God cares about how we interact and love and honor one another. And so I think one last thing, kind of in this theme of operating under a kingdom that has already been won for us, what does it mean to worship a king that is above all kings? What does it mean to worship a king that doesn't get mad at us if we go to his presence? He doesn't need to summon us. We can just go to him. What does it mean that our king came down and ate with us? What does it mean that, our king prepares a banquet for us and we get to take part in that and invite others to join? So what is God's invitation for you in your roles, in your relationships, in your friend groups, in your classes. I think we all have a place in God's plan if we remember that he has orchestrated every moment before this, and he will orchestrate every moment after. So how can we, like Esther, be praying for our community? How can we, like Esther, be encouraging one another, honoring one another, and loving one another? I think if we notice the little moments that God puts in our lives, I think we can see better and see more clearly what he is doing in the kingdom, and how we are to live, and how we are to love and honor and empower others to do that work. And so not only did Esther take action, but she sought for wise counsel, and she listened. She listened to Mordecai. She listened to the king's eunuchs. But she made her own decisions, and she acted knowing fully that God has already won. And so I think if we live in that posture, I think we can better glorify God and bring his kingdom here on earth. So it's my encouragement to anyone here that needs it this morning, that it's difficult when we think of conflict and when we think of not really knowing how I can honor and love another person. But I think if we think of the fact that we all have God's image in us, what does it mean to honor Christ in that person? What does it mean to see Christ in this person? And that is what I see as beautiful, and that is what I see as being made in his image.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.